Welcome to From Stardust to Us, in-depth conversations with thought leaders, artists, and spiritual activists, navigating the challenges of our times with integrity, joy, and purpose. I'm Bernice Marie Daly.
And I'm Linnell Hayden. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate our listeners. You can find us on YouTube, Buzzsprout, or any place where podcasts are found. If you enjoy our conversation, please help us reach more people by subscribing, liking, and commenting. So let's get into this week's conversation. Today, we're honored to be in conversation with Linda. Linda brings over 4 decades of experience at the intersection of law, spirituality, and social healing. A proud bilingual, bicultural Latina and native New Yorker, Linda's vocation is shaped by a lifelong commitment to walking alongside the marginalized, advocating for justice and nurturing the spiritual resilience of individuals and communities. Linda is an ordained Episcopal priest. Linda journeys with children and families affected by intimate partner violence, working to end cycles of intergenerational trauma. Her ministry blends deep pastoral presence with fierce advocacy, ensuring holistic, inclusive care for underserved and under-resourced populations. She collaborates with an interfaith team to design and lead programming that supports healing of body, mind, and spirit while remaining authentically rooted in her Episcopal faith. Linda, welcome. We're very grateful for your time with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It is an honor to be with you on this podcast.
Linda, the first question we usually ask is what brought you to your life vocation or vocations in your case. But we had an interesting conversation before we started recording where you expressed a need to maintain some level of being anonymous. And I thought that was very interesting and tragic and something that our listeners probably should hear. So I'd like to hear what led you to feeling the need to sort of safeguard your full name and your full identity.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to inform perhaps many people of something they may not be aware of, and I suspect will become more of an issue. Attorneys that do immigration work, such as myself, I do it on a pro bono basis, are being subjected to harassing emails, phone calls, texts, as we serve our communities of immigrants who need to be represented by counsel, and in the environment of trying to strip away all of their rights. There are people who would prefer that attorneys do not utilize our talents and skills on behalf of immigrants. So as a consequence, there is information floating around that we should be very mindful not to use our full names. As we know, anyone wanting to cause harm could easily just Google our names. We're public figures where all our names and our information are very easily found with a very little bit of work on any of the browsers. And so I myself have received emails from individuals saying things about me in my representation of immigrants that are threatening and harassing. And so in as much as I can, I try to maintain some anonymity towards my own person. And even more that for some reason, in some way, any of my clients would possibly be found and then they could be harmed as well. So it's not just towards me, but it's also the potentiality that my clients could feel some threat from individuals who would want to cause them harm.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It's a very disturbing situation, and we're very glad that you are free to be with us and also respect your confidentiality and protect you and your clients. And again, recognizing your confidentiality, you grew up in New York, and you have spent much of your life reaching out to vulnerable populations one way or another. Um, and I was just wondering if you wish to share, were there particular persons in your growing up that had a big influence on you, or that sort of which have sort of led you in a certain influenced you in a certain way that you
Yes.
might share with us a little bit about that?
Well, rather than one person, it was a whole community. I am a child of an immigrant who was non-English speaking, and as well as most of the people in our neighborhood. And in that time, I was one of the few children that was bilingual, spoke both English and Spanish. And I served as interpreter for many of the people in the neighborhood, and interpreting in institutions that was probably a little too young to understand the context. I would be accompanying some of our neighbors to medical appointments,
Uh-huh.
intervening with doctors, barely understanding what they were saying. But in those
Wow.
days, translation was not available to
Right.
patients. And so I remember very distinctly going with someone where the doctor would essentially tower over me and ask me to translate what he was saying to my colleague. And when I did not have the facility to translate it, barely understanding it, the
Sure.
doctor asked me to please go out in the hallway and get Jose, who was mopping the floors. And so
Okay.
Jose, who was mopping the floors, came into the room, much to my embarrassment because I had failed as a child in the task. And the doctor would then ask the individual to translate for my patient, for my neighbor, who was an older woman. So I remember that indicated to me that I should be very mindful to understand the individual that had the authority and the power, a tall white man with a white jacket. So that never happened to the individual that I
Again.
was with again.
Right.
Yes, that should
Right.
never happen. Since that
Right.
time, at least in New York City, there are many apps. There are individuals who are trained translators in most hospitals. So I hope that doesn't happen again. But it was the beginning of my understanding that the dominant culture did not
Yeah.
did not have enough respect or honor to the individuals that they were serving to facilitate the conversation in a way that honored and respected them. And
Yeah.
I was at the beginning of that journey.
Yeah. And it sounds like you were pretty young, like a teenager or even young,
Yes.
pretty
So
young.
I remember because I fully came into understanding English well. I did not speak English when I was young. Probably in 8 years old, 9 years old is when I would start, and my mother
Wow.
would allow me the honor, and I considered it an honor, not an imposition, to
Right.
attend these meetings with the people in my own community of the Lower East Side, as they needed to go to hospitals, to police stations, to welfare offices, to any place where there weren't translation services, and
Wow.
yet I would be translating letters. I would be translating many different
Wow.
things placed in very adult type situations. But that began
Yeah.
my journey of representing people who were not able to represent themselves.
It's quite an impact on a young mind and a young
Mm-hmm.
body and a young person. Absolutely. Wow. Well, you get gold stars for all those things. I know
I,
Linnell she's
well, I
dying
can't
to
get
say
over
something here.
this. Yeah, I can't get over the image of, bringing in somebody, that's unrelated or unknown into the doctor's room. I mean, that's kind of a violation of patient confidentiality as well. So yeah, that's incredibly disrespectful. I mean, it's a whole new perspective living in this country when you're not in the dominant culture or race or power structure. And
I
that's something.
suspect,
Go ahead.
pardon me. No, I suspect that's not such an unusual thing for
Mhm.
the English speaking child of an immigrant family.
Yeah.
It's happened still today. You may
Mhm.
notice, as in your travels, if you go to anywhere where there are people are still going to public places as immigrants, where there will usually be the designated child who
Yeah.
will, if you're looking carefully, there'll be the designated child who is the one that translates between the adult and
Mhm.
then the person with the authority.
Yeah.
Still
Mm,
happens.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
very
That.
intimidating. I mean, an 8 or 10-year-old, 12-year-old's pretty intimidating.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Or it takes a lot of courage. Takes a lot of courage and to hold all that.
Yeah, I've
Understand.
seen that myself,
Mhm, mhm.
working in the legal field, as a legal assistant in Arizona. We had, some, Native Americans, the Navajo, come in, and they had their young ones translate, for the elder. So yeah, I mean, that, I was speaking more about bringing in someone that's unknown to the family,
Mhm, mhm, mhm,
which,
mhm.
thank goodness Jose was there, but,
Yes,
you know,
yes. And
yeah.
ultimately, yeah, I mean, I don't remember very much of that meeting other than, to be honest, that I was shamed, that I was personally shamed that I could not serve the function, right? So part of it was not only was the patient discredited, dishonored, disrespected, that yes, an individual whose job was not to translate sensitive things between a doctor and a patient. Um, and it was probably not the first time this individual had been requested to do that. The doctor was
Oh, yeah.
very
Mm,
casual about,
mm,
well, let's get Jose over there to come in.
yeah,
So
yeah,
who
Yeah,
knows?
yeah.
yeah,
Right. This
So
is
that began.
also,
Mhm.
yeah.
this was also perhaps, you tell me, some of the things that that encouraged HIPAA types of statements and in those days to what is supposed to be available now to protect people's rights and privacy.
That's right. I suspect
Yeah.
so. But that began the journey of my understanding that there were authority figures, as I was saying earlier. There are authority figures that have the power to say no or have the power to control, and so those individuals needed to understand what the other side, usually
Hmm. Hmm.
um, so that the individual could get the services that they were entitled to. And that was the
Sure.
journey that I followed all my life, still do. Um,
Yes. Yes.
So
Yeah.
that
Thank
led
you.
you, obviously, that really, set the fire under your feet into law. Is that
mhm,
right?
mhm, mhm.
And I'm wondering, then you shifted to, priesthood. Is that
Mhm.
correct? Yeah,
Yes.
and so I'm wondering, that's an interesting shift here. You start your journey, in the physical world, so to speak, the legal, structure to help individuals, and then you move into spiritual matters, matters of the soul. So I'm wondering what was happening. Did something happen, or something internal within you, or some exterior event or person that what shifted within you that,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yes, thank you for that question. And I'm still trying to understand the depths of that as well, being relatively recently ordained as an Episcopal priest. I think that I can answer that by saying that sometimes advocacy, which is what I would do when I was a young child, led to law school. And there's a way that being in faith tradition, whatever that might be, is also holding space for people who need to be in touch with themselves, right? So there's a way that justice is served as a young child, justice is served as an attorney, and justice is served as a member of a religious tradition. Um, and there's always a way that you can hold space for people and also be the intermediary, right? So I very firmly believe, both as a priest and as a chaplain, that you are intuitively born with what you need spiritually to help you go through your journey. But sometimes it's not so easy to access, right? And so
Mhm.
you might need someone to help you, as it were, translate and bring out of you what's already there that has assisted you all your life. But you haven't been able to name it. So meaning making and naming is very often what chaplains, I know what chaplains do specifically, but priests um, will also serve that function. So it's not all that different.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. You've been described as the justice rooted chaplain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, can you say a little bit more about that and what that means for you?
Yes, thank you for asking. As I was in seminary, let me answer a question that you asked earlier, which I failed to completely answer. when I was in college, I had had a calling towards ministry. At that time, it wasn't possible for women in the faith tradition that I adhered to.
Right.
It was not possible.
Right.
So I
Right.
went to law school, had my career, raised my family, and in the process of coming back to the discernment that I'd had when I was very young, seminary in my tradition requires something called CPE.
Mhm.
Okay, and I took one unit and
Mhm.
fell in love with it. And I think that what drew me back to it was that interacting with people on a one-to-one and being with them at their most difficult times of their lives to uplift what they have, and then being able to remove myself and leave something behind that they can use. So it wasn't that I was giving them anything, that I was putting them back in touch with what was already there. So I fell in love with that one unit, have now become a board certified chaplain, and work with the population that you described earlier. We can talk about that later. But that was on my way to doing the seminary work that I needed to do to become an Episcopal priest.
Mm. And you were ordained more or less recently?
Yes, I was ordained because it's long. It's 6
Yeah.
years. It's 6
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
3 years of
Yeah.
seminary, and then another 3 years to go through the ordination process.
Right.
I was ordained in 25.
Okay. Well, congratulations. It takes longer to be
Yeah.
ordained than it does to get your legal your law
That's
degree,
right. Yes.
for heaven's sakes.
Yeah, that's quite a
Thank you.
combination. I mean, you're just an amazing person, Linda. In doing my research and reading on your work, there was somewhere I read that you preach about the Holy Family as refugees.
Oh,
And
thank you for that.
yeah, and I really would love to hear something maybe about that, and also maybe tying it into what we're seeing today with the immigrants.
Yes. So the refugees is what Mary, Joseph, and the infant baby Jesus were doing when they left Bethlehem um, to go to Egypt, as they had heard that there was a ruler, actually based by the Roman colonizers, who wanted to destroy all newborn baby boys. So it is with great fear that they could, and trepidation, I'm sure, that they could not return to their homeland, to their hometown, and instead exited to Egypt in order to save their child from harm, and landed as refugees. We don't know this, but leaving your home country because of the threat of harm is a not unusual way that refugees and immigrants have to suddenly leave their homes and not return. So the analogy was the Holy Family as refugees right after the birth of baby Jesus, and hiding in a place that is not their own, where they likely not knew the language, had no family, in hopes that one day they might be able to return. So I explored that in a 3-part presentation that was offered to the parishioners of the original church that I was associated with, and now the church that I'm associated with, which is 2 different churches. But yes, the imagery is very, very similar. And there is quite a lot of artwork, in fact, about that subject.
And offering that, what is the message? Or what is um, the grace, if you will, that you're offering that community,
So very
and
often,
tying that so closely together like
so the plight of refugees and immigrants is always leaving their home and everyone they know, and likely their family, and the place where they have been perhaps raised, and going to some place that's unknown under horrible and hostile conditions. And
that?
so the idea that even in the Christian tradition, most Christians would know the story, the birth of Jesus, the Holy Family, who were very highly placed in the tradition, should have had to leave. Even they had to leave their home to flee to somewhere else. It analogizes the situation under which the refugees are leaving to to their condition, and hopefully will give them the courage to continue going, knowing that even the Holy Family had to go what they went through.
Right, right. Thank you so much.
You know, I don't think many people understand how traumatizing it is to lose everything. Your, not just your country, but you know, your community, your language, your, you know, family, friends, and to flee. And I'm wondering if there's, and, you know, maintaining confidentiality, obviously, if there's a specific story in your work of a family or an immigrant person and what their resilience and what they lost, what they went through. I wonder if you'd feel comfortable sharing something a bit more, you know, personal with respect to an, you know, an actual lived experience, someone knew. Yeah.
Thank you. I could lift up many.
Yeah.
I'm trying to sort of think about one that might be more poignant than others. Let me just say that when our current individual in Washington did his first term, there was an uprising actually in the legal community where the ABA, the American Bar Association, asked if attorneys would be willing to go to Texas and serve the individuals that were waiting at the border between Mexico and Texas, to serve them as before they crossed over. So I was among them. So I can tell you that that was probably the most horrifying thing that I have ever done in the field of immigration, because people were literally waiting at the border to cross over. And there you saw people from all parts of not only Mexico, but Central America. And one of the stories that I remember hearing that still stays with me today is of a individual who had a small plantation, small, just enough to feed their family, a small plant, they call it plantation, a finca, a small plantation that just grew enough food for the family. However, it was situated in an area where there were there was a gang, very often these things are related to gang, who was trying to either intimidate individuals to sell their land or to basically give up their land. And the gang members had come to this individual's home and menaced them in multiple ways, that they were going to assault the daughter, they were going to take away the son who was just a pre-adolescent, and then they were going to shoot everyone. So this became a daily threat, which the family tried to ignore. But one day the children came back from school and their grandfather had been shot between the eyes. And the grandfather was found in the hammock that he used to inhabit every afternoon as he was waiting for the children to come back. And that was the moment when the family said, oh no, we need to leave immediately. And then there came a family, mom and dad with two children, left everything behind with the clothing on their back, nothing else. They had to travel at night. And one of the reasons they had to travel at night is that the gangs, the bandas, depending on the country that you're from, they can call it bandas, and different names for that, had informants all along. And so had it been known that this family was leaving, then they would have attempted to either shoot them, harm them, or shoot them. So they had to travel only at night through the jungle, the selvas, all the way up to Mexico, always mindful that anyone could report them and that they could be killed. So this was an example that imagery of the children coming home from school, going through their home as children do. You know, they're happy to be home. They're waiting for their snack, to see mom and dad, and coming out to the yard and seeing the grandfather dead in the hammock. And so that has always stayed with me. And that's just one of the stories. There are so many, so many.
Mm-hmm.
That really throws a wrench in the whole idea that, and I'd like to hear your perspective on this. You know, we hear a lot right now about how immigrants are coming, you know, to take our jobs and they just want to live off the services and blah, blah, but that's not really the case. Or, you know, they're criminals crossing the border en masse, and, you know, it's just a real mischaracterization. And I'd like to hear what you have to say about that, the current, what's being said.
Hmm.
Yeah.
We can say so much about that, right?
Yeah.
It's an endless well of hate.
Yeah.
We know there have been immigrants coming to this country. We are a country of immigrants, and there have been many that have come over the course of many years, all with the same dream of doing better for themselves and ultimately their families, and have made something out of nothing. And the immigrants that are coming now have made something out of nothing. We all know that immigrants will be happy to take the job that Americans don't want. New York City, the kitchens, they stand on street
Right.
corners, they go to hardware stores,
Right.
they work under the table, what we call under the table,
Right.
for contractors who will find them at Home Depots. Not that we have a lot of Home Depots here, but they know where they are.
Right.
And they do the absolutely most dangerous jobs that, to be quite frank, I don't think most people would be willing to do. And then sometimes the employers will call the police, not so much in New York, but elsewhere, will call the police and not pay them their wage at the end of the day. And yet they go do it again the following morning because they need to earn money.
They need to eat.
They need to eat. They need money to send back to their homes in whatever country they're from.
Right.
And yet these are the people that are being rounded up, killed, deported, very often deported to countries that they're not from, and left to find their ways back to their own home under the conditions that we talked about earlier, where they will be shot if they go back home.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the
That's
most horrifying things is we're sending them to countries they're not even from. That's not deportation. There's another term for it that I'm blanking out on right now, but they're also they work in agriculture. The crops they feed us basically. And one of the most horrifying images, early on was seeing how these farm workers were being rounded up, and I'm thinking, what is happening, so anyway, I'll let Bernice get in here.
Well, in addition to all of that, Linda, you have worked a lot on intimate partner violence and on intergenerational trauma. And I guess there's so many things to ask about that. But what I would like to focus on for now is how do you hold the tension? How do you hold the tension of such profound stories, as the one you just told as well, but uh, the tension of those stories and the suffering and the resiliency and the despair and the whole range of where do you hold that and um, what what feeds you, what holds you?
So that's an issue, of course. It's also an issue as an attorney, by the way. I mean, you hear these stories, but so what I'm doing currently is working as a board certified chaplain in a program where our patients are predominantly, not all exclusively, but women of color, usually monolingual Spanish, very often undocumented, although we do not ask that question,
Right.
who have been victimized by their intimate partner. This is what was formerly known as domestic violence. By the time they find their way to the program that I work with, they are either in a shelter, having fled the home or the house or the apartment where the attacks took place, and either they're with their children or sometimes they're separated with their children. So we work with either the individual or the child that witnessed the violence. And children don't need to witness. They hear, they know, they feel.
Sure.
So we know that 40% of all the children who have been affected by intimate partner violence of their loved ones will then repeat that cycle. Right.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it is extremely important that it be the intergenerational trauma be interrupted as young as possible, or if not, we will have another generation of women who allow that, as it were, or young men who may perpetuate, if it was a male who perpetrated the violence, who will perpetuate it in their relationships. And sometimes we have, just coincidentally, our patients may be the grandmother who was given custody.
Mhm.
It may be the foster parent. It will
Mhm.
be another family member who was not legally was not legally,
Official.
yes, not an official, but in families, very often it's the sister or the aunt or the grandaunt or somebody in the family will keep the children while the individual who was assaulted is either under treatment or for some other reason no longer with us. We have people who are the children of individuals who were killed before their eyes.
Right.
So how do I hold it? That was your question. It is hard. I don't see, probably on a daily basis, I see one or two patients. I see them frequently. I see them once a week, sometimes every other week, because it is a
Mhm.
lot to hold.
Yeah.
And our position is that we have to hold so that we in turn can be authentic with the patient. But it does
Right.
come at a personal price. Let me just say, with regard to resilience and what used to be called grit, it is not without its consequences.
Mhm.
Right. Resilience comes to price to the person who has to hold it. And so,
Yes.
as a chaplain, more than a priest, actually, as a chaplain, I hold a lot more
Yes.
because the stories come
And
every
those.
time, right? And they
Right.
come much more profoundly, right? So, once a relationship of trust is built, the story becomes much deeper than you imagine it. It's very often the person who's in front of you who themselves saw, remember the 40%
Mhm.
statistics, who saw violence in their home,
Mhm.
right? So then you have to unravel with them, well, not for them, with them, what
Mhm.
that came from. And so the story
Mhm.
that they bring with them has to be unraveled for them to understand how that may have happened, and then work
Mhm.
with their children to try to interrupt that it doesn't happen to them as well. That's why
Yeah.
the intergenerational component is very
Right.
important.
Right.
Um, so I do
Yeah.
things I do meditation, I read a lot, I do yoga, I do Pilates, I do many things that help me have the
Yeah.
fortitude to continue working with the population that I love.
Right.
Absolutely love them.
Right. With that, if I may ask, have you seen or could you say something about the Me Too movement in relation to these issues as you're talking? What impact or not has the Me Too movement, do you think, raised awareness, and what would you say has been helpful or not in that new, relatively new expression or trying to gather people together?
Mm. So I think if you're referring specifically to intimate partner violence affected people, we have to remember that intimate partner violence sometimes thrives because of secrecy, right?
Yes.
So I cannot tell you that I've seen the impact of that in that population, because
Mhm.
it's sometimes the silence and the secretiveness of being attacked, assaulted, belittled, ashamed, controlled, that allows the perpetrator to maintain that relationship. Okay, so
Right.
that aside,
Yeah.
I think that there are individuals who will be brave and come out and speak about their what has happened to them. In fact, probably in November in New York City, in the Upper West Side, there was a brides march where people who were victims of intimate
Mhm.
partner violence have come together, and on one particular day of the year, put on a white brides dresses, and
Right.
we march
Yeah.
through the
Yes.
street. It's called the brides march. We walk through the street on behalf of all the individuals who were killed at the hands of their perpetrator. And so
Yeah.
that is a way that one can say it's a Me Too movement, but these are individuals who have already removed themselves,
Yeah.
not the trauma,
Hmm.
their physical person,
Yes. Yeah.
remove
Yes. Yes.
themselves from the
Hmm.
hands of the perpetrators, and they walk on behalf of individuals who were not, who were killed. And
Right.
so that is, I think that is a Me Too movement as well.
Yes. Yes.
Not in
Yes.
the traditional sense.
Yeah.
Um, mm,
But that whole secrecy thing and the whole question of why is she staying and how can she blah blah blah, all of that,
mm,
which makes me crazy personally, is I think I'd like to imagine that some of this more public display, if you will, public statement, these efforts to bring it into people's awareness, because we know we just want to ignore all this stuff and pretend it doesn't happen and all the rest of it, um, that it breaks through a little bit into awareness of this is happening everywhere, and to women, and mostly women, and to some men. Um, and I was just, it seems to me that this particular aspect of abuse has hardly reached the public square at all. Although we're
Mhm.
seeing things in the athletic world and so forth, but
Mm.
it's ubiquitous, really.
It is.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
let me also connect that increasingly we're seeing an uptick in women who are being threatened by the perpetrator, because they would fear that that police going to the police would somehow
Yeah,
expose them
especially.
to a level of scrutiny that they might not otherwise, and their
Right.
perpetrator may be threatening them with that.
Yeah.
If you tell anyone, or if you go to the police, or if you report me, then that will mean the kids will
Right.
be no longer here, you will be deported. So there is, even the perpetrators are utilizing what they see and what they
Mhm.
hear to then
Mhm.
threaten the individual who is being harmed, and
Yeah.
it maintains a level of secrecy that
Right.
that may even be more hideous, than was previously. Also, um, on that point of silence,
Mhm.
there is in some cultures a way that their family members may be, I've heard it from some of my patients, maybe encouraging them to maintain their
Yes.
relationship with the perpetrator for multiple of reasons. That it's
Yes.
embarrassing, that it's not appropriate in the context of whatever religious tradition they have,
Right.
um,
Right.
that will expose the children to having one parent, to not having the father there. So there's
Right.
a lot of levels at which silence is maintained.
Mhm.
Um, that only cause harm to the individual who's already traumatized. So imagine on
That's
top of the
right.
trauma of being abused, it's the
Right.
faith, it's the
Right.
family, it's the threat of losing their children, being separated from their children. So it has become a level of intensity that we could not have anticipated.
Right. To me, that is truly domestic terrorism. It's
Agreed.
domestic terrorism.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So we've asked a few people, Linda, how in their work or advocacy do they maintain, as they're holding space for others, do they maintain that for themselves and their own personal peace, or however we word it? And you're the first person, and I find this really eye-opening, that said there is a cost. And we just need to accept that, right? Know there's a cost. You do what you can for yourself, meditate, read, whatever, take walks. But there's a lot of people, and maybe I'm guilty of this as well in my own way, where we're sort of on the fence, going 100% into a direction of either advocacy or whatever we want to do. But there's sort of a fear. And I think a lot of that fear has to do with not just, what might happen externally to us, but internally, like my peace will be disturbed,
Mm.
which, I find, you know, well, I can go on about that. I don't like that within myself. I don't think I do that too often, but I have seen it. And you're the first person that says it will be disturbed. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, and if I've gotten your words wrong, please correct me. But what would you say to people on the fence that are really called to justice work or protesting or advocacy, but they're kind of, they don't know if they have it within them. They don't want to
Mhm.
disturb, their own inner world and outer world.
Mm. Hmm. That's such a great question, because secondary trauma, tertiary trauma is a real thing. I think for individuals who want to try to see how they feel, only they can assess it. Also, don't work alone. Go in groups, whatever it is that you think that you might want to do. There are certainly organizations that will allow you to work in teams, or and I'm going to give you an example in a minute. and always be mindful of your own ability to maintain your peace, because that you can't, the cup has to be full, right? You can't give what you don't have. And however that works for you. I've just come, by the way, the reason that I'm where I am is that I do acupuncture every week. So I've just come, that's one of my techniques. I do acupuncture every week. So I just had my session.
Right.
So as an example, we know that in many large cities, there's ICE agents that are roaming around trying to kidnap people. And in New York City, there's a very robust population of people that will walk together in areas where we are told there are ICE people. So I teach Know Your Rights groups, but I'm also a member of groups as well. So last week I was part of a group in my own community in West Harlem, because West Harlem actually has a lot of Africans that do hair braiding, and they're becoming now on the radar. They're now on the radar of ICE. And what we do is we walk together as a group, allowing ourselves to be seen by individuals and sharing with them flyers in the native language, and talking to them and saying, you can reach out to us. Here's a number. If anything should happen to you or members of your community, please call this number and we will come immediately and be there for you. And so the idea, you probably know, is to be there, not to confront ICE, because you know where that goes, but rather to just be a force of peace and good and support for the community that is being harassed. And so that kind of brings you within a community of like-minded people. And then you debrief, right? So the debriefing is where a lot of the emotion comes, that you can say to people, yes, oh my gosh, that was like really, that really touched my heart, or that was so scary, or whatever the emotion is. You are never alone in this kind of work. So trying to do it all by yourself, not so much. Not so much. Right. Find like-minded people and do it as a group. So I don't know if that's something that they do in your communities. You're from Connecticut, Bernice? Yeah.
I'm in California.
And you're in California. And so in New York, it's a fairly routine thing that we see, is people with different colored jackets, depending on what organization you're with, and where they're walking, and they have a little whistle, and and so we walk in the communities where ICE has been seen, to let them know that they are not going to be able to take whoever they want just like that. But we're gonna resist. We're gonna maybe, I don't know about disobedience, because that will get you in trouble, but there will be a presence that says, we are witnessing. We are here to witness. And you will not be able to do this under the cover of dark. We will be here. We will know some consequence.
Some accountability. Some accountability. I'm wondering about, since you're talking primarily about larger cities, and that seems to be, a target, certainly, in these days, particularly. But I have heard about restorative justice. And I'm thinking about, you're talking about community and being together. And, I grew up in New York, as I said to you earlier, and there are, there's groups. I mean, even though the city is huge and all that, there's these well, and when I was young, the neighborhood kinds of things, I know they have changed to some degree, but there's that community piece that we really can't live without. We really can't live without. But I'm wondering about restorative justice, and, what you might hope to see or offer in that modality, as opposed to this, what I'm gathering is a pretty black and white, or can be pretty black and white legal system. What might you say about the restorative justice as being, maybe another tool we could develop in the future or now in certain areas?
Yes, thank you for that, because it is a movement. It is taught now in law schools as a way.
It's taught.
It is taught. Yeah. Not maybe every law school, but here in New York, a lot of the law schools offer courses on that, so that when the students come out of school, they have.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great.
It is something that they have as countermeasure to being punitive, right? So restorative justice if it's going to be utilized at all, very often it's utilized in the context of one person harming another. There's many ways to handle this, right? There are many contexts in which it's appropriate, but in the context that I'm thinking of, that I've worked with, is one person harming another, and the two parties may know each other. Very often they do. And so the idea is to not introduce the court system into that conversation, into that relationship, but rather have the two individuals come face to face and understand what happened. One, understand what happened. Two, understand if there is any way to alleviate the harm from the person that was the perpetrator to the person who was perpetrated upon, and then try to reach some sort of an understanding that satisfies both parties. And this way avoids having to bring in, sometimes it's the educational system that turns over a child to the police effectively. Sometimes it's a court system that once it gets started, it's hard to stop it because it's a very big and slow moving machine. And sometimes between the parties, there has to be an element of forgiveness, acknowledgement that a harm was caused, and also an element of forgiveness if it's possible, so that both people can understand that yes, a harm was caused. We understand why, but if I can't forgive you, then I will work towards forgiving you, towards that breach, because there's a breach of trust, being remedied. So I think restorative justice is something that can be taught very early on, even in the educational system, to children. And I know law students are beginning to be taught about restorative justice as a solution to problems. It's also used in the civil world, actually. And so mediation, if you know what mediation is, in a legal context, mediation is a type of restorative justice, right? So it keeps the parties out of court. Very often judges will say, I want the parties to go to mediation. Mediation is a type of restorative justice.
I see. So it's maintaining a dialogue in that case between the various parties involved. When you say that, am I willing to forgive you for the harm you did to me? And maybe I'm willing to work on that. Is there also part of this something that the perpetrator can offer? In other words, can they work out something together? Like, I don't know, you stole something. I don't know. So can you give an example of how that might work?
Absolutely. In fact, that is the point, is that it's a joint solution to the problem. And I'm going to give you an example, a small example that could be the model for a larger example. Very often adolescents do this kind of thing. They don't quite have the control over their emotions, and they're not quite grown up, right, until you're about 21, I understand, or 23. And so they will do things out of anger, or later. They will do things to one another out of anger, right? And there may be, and sometimes it's a small thing. I'm not quite sure,
Whatever.
The cell phone seems to be the big one right now. Taking someone's cell phone, breaking it, not giving back to them, hiding it, doing, so that becomes an issue over which people will fight, right? They will fight, and they will harm, and they will bully, and they will say horrible, nasty things to one another. The school can utilize those opportunities to create courses around restorative justice. And so if you can teach young people at that age, when they're open, their minds are open before they're completely formed, to the idea that there was a wrong, we need to understand the wrong, we need to return the cell phone, we need to pay an installment for a new cell phone, whatever it is, something. And they do it in the community that they are. At that point in time, they're a member of a community. It's the classroom. It's the school. Everybody knows, right? Because everybody knows everything in high school. Everybody knows what has happened between A and B. And so they are held accountable not only by the person to whom they caused the harm, took the item, broke the thing, whatever it was, but they're also being held together by the community that knows, right? So it's not just a dialogue between two people. It's the entire community who is involved in that. So in the larger world, right, in the real world, when you're no longer surrounded by a community that's people who are like-minded. It's a little different, right?
Yeah.
But if you can teach those skills at that age, when people's minds
Mhm.
are open,
Yeah.
when they can understand the cause and effect of the things that they do, that is a beautiful thing, because it can be modeled as an adult.
Mhm.
Right.
But you have to be
exactly.
taught. You have to be taught.
Right.
I'm
Exactly.
wondering,
Thank
in
you.
addition
Thank you.
to the restorative part and the acknowledging by the perpetrator of the harm that they did, how important it is that for the perpetrator to forgive themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's a psychological issue. That's really, yeah. And that I see that repeated in individuals who are harmed by domestic violence, who blame themselves for the violence. I know we're all over
Absolutely.
I know that we're all over the place on this,
Yeah.
but there's a certain amount of, even as a priest, I see that, right? There's a certain guilt that whatever happened to me or my loved one was because I did something, right? There's a punitive component that you punish yourself because you feel guilty of whatever it is that you think you may have done. So these are all sort of related subjects, right? There's like, I have to forgive myself. I have to understand. I have to forgive myself before I can forgive others. So it's back to the cup half full or half empty. You can't, your own cup has to be full.
Yeah.
And you have to understand before you start talking to individuals and asking them for forgiveness, because you have to forgive yourself first and foremost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's one other thing you've mentioned. We're sort of talking about community here a bit in the last few minutes, gathering of groups and community um, and how essential that is to our lives. And um, I believe you have been involved in trying to foster lay leadership in some local communities. Can you say something more about that and how that has gotten started, how that works for you, how you would see it in the future?
Right. So thank you. So lay leadership, I'm going to talk about it in the context of religious traditions. But I
Yes,
can
it
talk.
could be.
Yeah, I could talk.
Yeah, either way, it could be.
I could
Yeah.
talk about law students I've mentored. But let's talk about so as individuals are discerning their call. That's sort of the phrasing that we use. Whether
Right.
discerning their call, there is a way that they will reach out to other individuals to find out what their discernment journey was. In as much as one can articulate that, it doesn't mean that the individuals that are asking can usually everyone has their own journey, right? Because we're all different. We come from different places. But if you can articulate to them your call and your journey, it very often helps them see that, yes, their journey can be different, will be different, but it is absolutely authentic to who they are. And so in that regard, I have not so much, I would say, led them, but allowed them to see that their calling, whatever their discernment journey is completely appropriate for them. And they need to have faith in themselves, and that their journey will take them as far as it should, or as far as it can.
And then get the support in that whole process.
Yes, that's right. The mentoring is critical.
Yeah.
Well, Linda, I want to be cognizant of your time. I know you're incredibly busy. You do incredibly important work. And we're just so grateful to have this hour with you, for you to take the time to talk to us and our listeners.
If I may, I'd like to ask you one more question.
Oh, sorry, Bernice.
Well, we were sort of like moving around that topic of if it's personal, okay, personal question. Um, your faith, your faith. Now, after many years, you have recently been ordained. This is obviously important to you, and you're an Episcopal priest. Am I correct?
Yes.
So, and all that you have described, which is which is heavy and profound, and in healing or moving toward healing. Um, how has your faith sort of moved inside of you and support you and your belief of uh, the significance of the work that you do as a whole?
Wow. So I think that the journey that I started could only have been brought to me by the Spirit, what I would call the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
And that seed was planted so very young. I don't mean
Yeah.
necessarily in age, but a long time ago. And so what I have come to understand about myself is that I was meant to be at some point an individual who advocated and journeyed with others and for others. And so for me, this is a continuation of what I did as a child when I went to the hospital with the patient who didn't speak
Yes.
English. That is exactly,
Absolutely.
it is very similar, despite the facts being a little seemingly different. No, it's exactly the same thing, where I was
Yeah.
advocating on behalf of that individual, both the patient and well, let me leave it there. So I think it's been a lifelong calling that I could not ignore, even at my mature age. And I'm so blessed to have been able to do it. So, and I continue to do it on behalf of others and myself. So I think that has been, thank you for that question. I have to think about that a little bit more.
Wonderful. It's been a pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure and a blessing to be with you. So thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this
Thank you,
opportunity.
Linda. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you. Have a great day.